The howling screams of alarm klaxons flooded the Saurian invasion fleet's flagship bridge as Dennis Dixon's stolen stealthcraft streaked past, narrowly avoiding the barrage of plasma cannons. He gritted his teeth, not caring that the alien warlord Xenos had detected his escape. All that mattered was that he had to warn Earth before it was too late. Not even an hour ago, Dennis had been investigating unusual energy readings on Callisto, one of Jupiter's moons. What he found sent chills down his spine. A massive, hidden Saurian military base buzzing with activity as they prepared a planet-crushing invasion armada to enslave humanity. He had slipped inside to gather intel, and what he overheard sickened him to the core. The ruthless Xenos planned to catch Earth completely off guard, bombarding cities from orbit until the humans had no choice but to kneel before Saurian rule. Dennis barely made it out as alarms blared and Saurian guards flooded the corridors. He stole the closest ship he could find and punched the thrusters. Xenos' furious screech boomed over the comms, demanding the human intruder be blasted out of the stars. But Dennis flew like a man possessed, juking and jinxing to avoid streaking plasma blasts and the swarm of Saurian fighters suddenly in hot pursuit. His shields flared and popped as he took glancing hits. Warning lights flashed across the cockpit, hyperdrive and life support failing. No time to repair them. He had to jump now or be space dust. Praying to the stars, he pulled the hyperjump lever and crashed to Earth in a trail of smoke and fire, skidding across an empty field. Pain lanced through his body, but he pushed it down. He had to get to Allied Earth Command, had to warn them. As blood streamed into his eyes, he stumbled into the nearest military outpost and gasped out his report to shocked personnel. The horrific news spread like wildfire. The Saurian fleet was coming. Invasion imminent. Earth had to mobilize every defense it had, now. Evacuation alarms wailed as humanity braced for the worst. Mere hours later, the skies above Earth's cities flickered and warped as a planet-wide ultimatum transmission beamed down from Xenos himself. Surrender now, or watch your civilization burn. Earth refused to bow. Moments later, the first orbital blasts smashed into the planet's surface, sending skyscrapers toppling like toys. Flames and screams filled the streets. But Earth would not go quietly. Not while heroes like Dennis still drew breath. He strapped into an experimental fighter craft, rocketing into the chaos above. Dozens of others soared beside him, all prepared to sacrifice everything to save their species. If this desperate counterstrike failed, then humankind was doomed to kneel before Saurian masters forever. Dennis narrowed his eyes, aiming straight for the pulsing heart of Xenos' dreadnought. Time to show this alien scum what it meant to threaten Earth. Dennis's fighter screams towards Xenos' dreadnought, plasma cannons blazing. His desperate salvo slams into the flagship's shields, making them flicker and fail momentarily. A lucky shot sears through and impacts the dreadnought's main gun battery, setting off a chain reaction of explosions that tears the weapon apart. Xenos' furious screech crackles over the comms as his ship's offensive capabilities wink out. But Dennis's moment of triumph is short-lived. Xenos orders his forces to redouble their ground assault in retaliation. Drop ships rain from the sky, disgorging hordes of Saurian shock troops and rumbling tanks into Earth's battered cities. Urban centers become brutal battlegrounds as the invaders attempt to crush humanity's resistance and establish forward bases. Earth's defenders dig in, using their home turf advantage as they wage desperate guerrilla warfare. Dennis, grounded but determined, throws himself into coordinating the resistance. He shares hard-won knowledge of Saurian tactics and tech from his infiltration of their lunar base, helping Allied Command prioritize targets and shore up defenses. "We need to disrupt their battlefield comms," Dennis states firmly in an emergency briefing, pointing to a holomap. "I'm guessing these relays are the key. Take those out, and they'll be in disarray." Jack Hawkins and Sam Riggs, Dennis's staunchest allies, volunteer to lead the strikes. "We'll get it done," Jack vows. "Just point us at 'em." The relay raids are swift and damaging, sowing chaos in Saurian lines as they lose coordination. For a few days, Earth seems to be clawing its way back. But Xenos is nothing if not adaptable. Incensed by the guerrillas' success, he launches a devastating series of counterstrikes, leveling entire blocks in firestorms of plasma. The reprisals leave Jack's team decimated and Sam's missing in action, the relays smoldering ruins. But a glimmer of hope arises from an unlikely source. A Saurian defector named Zolth, who contacts Dennis out of the blue. "I can give you a way to cripple Xenos's flagship," Zolth offers, "but I want asylum." Dennis, naturally wary, presses him to prove his intentions. Zolth does so by guiding a squad in evacuating a group of civilians from a war-torn neighborhood moments before it's annihilated by orbital bombardment. Tentatively accepting Zolth's aid, Dennis forms a plan to infiltrate Xenos's command ship via its shield weakness and take it down from the inside. Jack, Sam, and Zolth join his hand-picked boarding team as they capture some Saurian shuttles and make their approach, dodging vicious anti-air fire. Finally, they battle through to the shield generator chamber, only to find Warlord Xenos himself awaiting them, his face twisted in a furious snarl, energy blade in hand. Zolth roars a challenge in the Saurian tongue and charges his former master. As they clash in a storm of sparks and shrieks, Dennis dashes for the generator controls, seeking to end this once and for all. Dennis smacked his head into Xenos's scaly jaw, sending the Saurian warlord reeling. Zolth followed up with a vicious kick to Xenos's midsection. The alien leader stumbled back, green blood oozing from his wounds. "It's over, Xenos," Dennis spat. "Your invasion has failed." Xenos let out a guttural laugh, his reptilian eyes gleaming with malice. "You think you've won, human? I'll see your world burn before I—" His words cut off as Zolth's energy blade pierced his chest. Xenos gasped, then slumped to the ground, but as he fell, his clawed hand slammed down on a control panel. Alarms blared throughout the ship. "Self-destruct sequence initiated," an emotionless voice announced. 5 minutes to detonation." He and Zolth sprinted from the command center, racing through corridors as explosions rocked the massive vessel. Fires erupted around them, and the ship's superstructure groaned ominously. "This way," Zolth shouted, leading them down a side passage. "Shuttle bays close." They burst into the hangar just as another explosion tore through the deck behind them. Dennis leapt into the nearest shuttle, Zolth right behind him. As Dennis fired up the engines, a support beam crashed down, nearly crushing them. The shuttle rocketed out of the bay seconds before the flagship detonated in a massive fireball. The shockwave buffeted their small craft, but Dennis managed to keep control as they sped towards Earth. On the planet below, cheers erupted as the Saurian mothership exploded. The alien troops on the ground fell into disarray, their communications suddenly cut off. Earth's defenders seized the moment, launching coordinated counterattacks across the globe. But the victory was short-lived. Within days, a new Saurian leader emerged, Krath, Xenos's ruthless second-in-command. He quickly reasserted control over the invasion force and escalated the brutality of their attacks. Dennis watched in horror as Krath's first broadcast played on screens worldwide. The feed showed human prisoners strapped to tables, screaming as Saurian scientists performed gruesome experiments on them. "This is the fate that awaits all who resist us," Krath's voice boomed. "Surrender now or watch your loved ones suffer." Over the next weeks, Dennis led daring raids on Saurian prison camps, freeing captives and exposing the aliens' atrocities. Zolth provided crucial intel, allowing Earth's forces to strike the invaders where it hurt most. But just as the tide seemed to turn, Krath unleashed his most horrific weapon yet. A Saurian ship released a cloud of sickly green gas over New York City. Within hours, thousands were dead or dying, their bodies twist. The green gas dissipated, leaving New York a ghost town. Dennis stared at the screens in horror, his fists clenched. This was genocide on an unthinkable scale. But even as humanity reeled from this devastating blow, the tides of war shifted once more. Earth's defenders, driven by righteous fury, launched a series of coordinated strikes that shattered the Saurian invasion force. Krath's flagship exploded in low orbit, raining debris across the Atlantic. The alien troops on the ground, now leaderless, fell into disarray and were swiftly routed. In the weeks that followed, a somber mood settled over the planet. The invasion was over, but at a terrible cost. As the dust settled, Earth's leaders gathered in the war-torn ruins of Geneva to chart humanity's path forward. Dennis stood before the assembled representatives, his face haggard from sleepless nights. "We won this battle," he said, his voice echoing through the makeshift chamber. "But the war isn't over. Not by a long shot. We need to focus on rebuilding, not chasing shadows in space," one delegate shouted. "And leave ourselves vulnerable to the next attack," another fired back. Dennis slammed his hand on the podium. "Enough! We don't have the luxury of choosing one or the other. We must do both." In the end, a compromise was reached. Earth would rebuild, but it would also look to the stars. A new agency was formed, the Terran Defense and Exploration Initiative. Its mission, to protect Earth and push humanity's reach into the cosmos. Dennis found himself thrust into the spotlight as the initiative's leader. Cameras flashed, and reporters clamored for interviews as he toured the globe, inspecting research facilities and training grounds. But the weight of responsibility never left his shoulders. Late one night, he sat alone in his office poring over reports. A knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. "Enter," he called out. Zolth stepped inside, his reptilian features illuminated by the dim light. "You should rest, Dennis. The war is over." Dennis shook his head. "No, my friend, I fear it's only beginning." Zolth's eyes widened as Dennis laid out the truth, the existence of the Krill Collective, their vast empire built on conquest and subjugation. The Saurian invasion had been a mere probe, testing Earth's defenses before the hammer fell. "We need to be ready," Dennis said, his voice tight with persistence. "Whatever it takes." Over the following months, Earth transformed. Factories that once churned out tanks and fighter jets now produced sleek spacecraft capable of interstellar travel. Scientists worked around the clock to unlock the secrets of Saurian technology, reverse engineering powerful energy weapons and shielding systems. Dennis threw himself into the work, personally overseeing the training of Earth's first deep space combat units. In between grueling simulations and tactical briefings, he found time to reconnect with old comrades. "Never thought I'd see the day," Jack Hawkins chuckled, examining a prototype plasma rifle. The grizzled veteran had answered Dennis's call without hesitation. "Feels good to be back in the fight." Sam Riggs, ace pilot and eternal troublemaker, sauntered into the hangar bay. "So, boss," she said with a grin, "when do we take the fight to them?" "Analysis," he barked. "Sir," a technician replied, voice quavering, "they match no known configurations, but the energy readings, they're off the charts." Dennis's blood ran cold. The Krill had arrived sooner than anyone expected. Earth wasn't ready, not by a long shot, but they had no choice. It was fight or die. He keyed the facility-wide comm. "This is Dixon. All personnel to battle stations. This is not a drill." As klaxons wailed and troops scrambled to their posts, Dennis turned to Zolth. "We need to buy Earth time. You know their tactics better than anyone." Zolth nodded grimly. "I have an idea, but it's risky." "At this point," Dennis said, "I'll take any edge we can get." Within the hour, a stealth ship carrying Dennis, Zolth, Jack and Sam slipped past the approaching Krill armada. Their mission? To infiltrate the invasion force and sabotage it from within. As they neared the massive Krill flagship, Dennis's grip tightened on the controls. "All right, team, let's show these bastards what happens when you mess with Earth." The ship accelerated, plunging into the heart of the enemy fleet. Whatever happened next would determine the fate of humanity. The stealth ship shuddered as it emerged from lightspeed, alarms blaring throughout the cramped cockpit. Dennis gripped the arms of his seat, scanning the sensors. "Multiple contacts," Jack shouted. "Krill patrol fleet dead ahead." Sam's hands flew across the controls. "Hang on, boys, this is going to get rough." The ship lurched as Sam threw it into a wild, evasive pattern. Dennis's stomach churned as they spiraled and twisted, narrowly avoiding lances of energy fire from the krill vessels. "We can't keep this up," Dennis growled. "Sam, find us somewhere to set down now." Sam's eyes darted across the nav display. There, uncharted moon, minimal atmosphere, it's our only shot. Silence fell as the trio stumbled from the smoking wreck. Dennis wiped blood from a gash on his forehead, surveying the alien landscape. Twisted spires of rock jutted into a murky purple sky. Jack emerged from the ship, shaking his head. "Bad news, boss. Engines are fried, weapons offline. We're not going anywhere in this bucket." Dennis nodded grimly. "All right. We need to find a way to contact Earth. I'll lead a scouting party. Jack, see what you can salvage from the ship. Sam, keep an eye out for those krill bastards." As Dennis picked his way across the rocky terrain, a glint of metal caught his eye. He froze, squinting into the distance. "What the hell?" A sleek structure rose from behind a ridge, its architecture utterly alien. Before Dennis could react, figures materialized from the shadows. Tall, willowy beings with iridescent skin leveled strange weapons at the humans. "Don't move," Dennis hissed to his companions. One of the aliens stepped forward, its multifaceted eyes studying them intently. It chittered something unintelligible, then gestured with its weapon. With no other choice, the humans allowed themselves to be led through winding corridors of impossibly smooth stone. They emerged into a vast chamber where a semicircle of alien figures sat upon ornate thrones. Dennis stepped forward, heart pounding. "I'm Dennis Dixon of Earth. We came here by accident, fleeing from our enemies. And yours, the krill." A ripple of shock passed through the assembled Lethrai. Zalthrak's eyes widened. "You know of the krill? How is this possible?" Dennis recounted Earth's brutal invasion, their desperate counterattack, and the revelation of the vast krill empire. As he spoke, the Lethrai listened with growing horror and fascination. When he finished, Zalthrak's voice was heavy. "We know well the cruelty of the krill. Eons ago they nearly wiped our people from existence. Only by cloaking our entire civilization did we survive." Another Lethrai spoke up. "If what you say is true, the galaxy stands on the brink of darkness. We cannot allow the krill to grow unchecked." Zalthrak nodded solemnly. "We will aid you, humans of Earth. Together, we may yet stand against the coming storm." In the days that followed, the humans worked alongside the Lethrai, combining their technologies and tactics. A bold plan took shape, to strike at the heart of krill power in this system. Dennis stood before the assembled strike team, a mix of hardened human veterans and lithe Lethrai warriors. "This won't be easy," he said, "but if we succeed, we'll deal the krill a blow they won't soon forget." The reconfigured stealth ship slipped past the krill's outer defenses, a ghost in the night. As they approached the sprawling shipyard, Dennis felt a familiar tension coiling in his gut. "Remember," he said to the assembled raiders, "our priority is the long-range transmitter. We get in, we send the signal, we get out. Let's move." They burst from the ship's hold, energy weapons blazing. Krill soldiers fell before their onslaught, caught off guard by the audacious assault. Dennis led the charge, his mind focused solely on their objective. They fought their way through twisting corridors, the air thick with plasma fire and acrid smoke. Finally, they reached the transmission hub. Jack's fingers flew across the alien controls, inputting the coded signal. "It's done," he shouted. "Earth knows we're—" His words were cut short as the far wall exploded inward. Krill heavy assault troops poured through the breach, their weapons unleashing a hellish barrage. Suddenly, the ceiling above them shattered. A massive krill bomber descended through the hole, its weapons blazing, but targeting the krill forces. As they scrambled aboard, Dennis allowed himself a moment of hope, but it was short-lived. A lucky shot from a krill cannon tore through their engines, sending them spiraling into the depths of the shipyard. They abandoned the crippled craft, fleeing into the labyrinthine interior of the krill facility. Dennis led the way, his mind racing as they delved deeper into enemy territory. What they found chilled him to the bone. vast chambers filled with enslaved alien species, forced to labor in hellish conditions. Krill scientists performed gruesome experiments on captives, seeking to perfect their weapons of conquest. "My God," Jack whispered. "They're going to do this to Earth if we fail." Air-piercing alarm cut through the air. They'd been discovered. Dennis urged the team onward, ducking and weaving through the alien corridors as Krill hunter-killer squads closed in. Finally, they burst into an enormous hangar bay, only to find themselves surrounded by the Krill's elite guard. Dennis raised his weapon, prepared to sell his life dearly. That's when the entire facility shook with a thunderous roar. Through the hangar's force field, Dennis saw flashes of weapons fire in orbit. A vast armada of human and Lethrai ships had arrived, answering their distress call. In the chaos that followed, Dennis spotted their chance at an experimental Krill fighter, its engines spooling up. "There," he shouted, "our ticket out of here." They fought their way to the craft, clambering aboard as energy bolts sizzled past. Sam took the controls, his face set in concentration as he piloted them through the firestorm erupting around the shipyard. Finally, they broke free of the maelstrom, linking up with the human flagship that hung in high orbit. As they docked, Dennis allowed himself a moment of relief. They'd survived, and struck a crucial blow against the Krill. But as he looked out at the battle raging around them, he knew the war was just getting started. The real fight for Earth's survival and the hope of the universe was just beginning. The Hyperion's command deck buzzed with frantic activity as Dennis and his team stumbled in, their suits still smoking from the intense heat of their escape. Admiral Krasner, a towering figure with piercing eyes, turned from the holographic battle display. Dennis stepped forward, his legs shaky but his voice firm. "Sir, we've dealt a critical blow to the Krill. Their shipyards are crippled, but it's not enough," Krasner finished, his weathered face grim. "We've lost a third of our fleet already. This war ends now, or humanity does." The Admiral's fingers danced across the holo-display, bringing up a 3D map of the system. 2 planets glowed an ominous red. "These are our targets," Krasner explained. "A command nexus on this volcanic hellhole, and a logistics hub in high orbit around this gas giant. We hit both simultaneously, while the fleet keeps the Krill's main force occupied." Dennis studied the map, his mind racing. "I'll take the command nexus, sir." Krasner nodded. "I thought you might. Choose your team carefully, Dixon. This is a one-way trip if you fail." Within the hour, Dennis stood before his hand-picked squad in the Hyperion's launch bay. Sam Riggs checked her flight suit seals, while Jack Hawkins ran final diagnostics on their captured Krill dropship. "Listen up," Dennis called out. "We're about to fly into the mouth of hell itself, but remember, every Krill bastard we take down is one less threat to Earth." The dropship's engines roared to life as Sam guided them out of the Hyperion's bay. The void of space erupted in a dazzling light show as the human Lethrai fleet engaged the Krill armada. "Entering atmosphere," Sam announced, her voice tight with concentration. "Brace for turbulence." The ship bucked violently as they plunged through roiling clouds of sulphurous gas. Jagged spires of obsidian rock loomed ahead, while rivers of molten lava snaked across the barren landscape. Suddenly the sky lit up with searing bolts of energy. "Anti-air defenses," Jack shouted. "They've got us locked." Sam's hands flew across the controls, sending the dropship into a wild corkscrew. Dennis felt his stomach lurch as they dove and weaved through the barrage. With a final burst of speed, Sam brought them down hard on a narrow landing pad. The team spilled out, weapons at the ready. A hail of plasma fire greeted them. Krill shock troops poured from fortified bunkers, their insectoid forms jam-packed with cybernetic augmentations. "Push forward!" Dennis roared, unleashing a barrage from his pulse rifle. The air filled with the acrid stench of ozone and burning chitin as they fought their way into the complex. Guided by Lethrai intelligence, they descended deeper into the facility. The smooth obsidian walls gave way to twisting organic structures that pulsed with an eerie bioluminescence. They emerged into a vast chamber. Rows upon rows of cylindrical tanks lined the walls, each filled with a slowly developing Krill embryo. A cloning facility, Dennis realized, his blood running cold. They're building an army to conquer the galaxy. Pressing on, they encountered more horrors. Laboratories filled with mutilated alien corpses, test subjects screaming in agony as Krill scientists performed unspeakable experiments. Finally, they reached the heart of the complex. A colossal chamber stretched before them, dominated by a pulsing orb of psychic energy. Alien beings of various species hung suspended around it, their minds linked to the Nexus in a grotesque parody of communion. "Plant the charges," Dennis ordered. "We're ending this nightmare." As they moved to disable the Nexus, a bone-chilling screech filled the air. A massive figure materialized before them, Krill Oth, the system's supreme overlord. Its obsidian armor gleamed in the pulsing light of the Nexus, radiating an aura of pure malevolence. Before anyone could react, waves of psychic force slammed into them. Dennis felt his muscles lock up, his palms sweating under the assault. Fighting through the pain, he reached out with his own thoughts, channeling every ounce of willpower he possessed. For a moment, the Nexus flickered. "Now!" Dennis screamed. Sam and Jack opened fire, their weapons blazing. The Marines added their firepower, but Krilloth shrugged off the attacks like raindrops. A Lithrai commando darted forward, energy blade flashing. With impossible speed, he slipped past Krilloth's defenses, only to be impaled on a razor-sharp tendril of living metal. But the sacrifice created an opening. Dennis saw his chance and took it. He focused all his rage, his fear, his hope for humanity's survival into a single, searing lance of psychic energy. The blast caught Krilloth squarely in the chest, shattering its impenetrable armor. The alien monstrosity stumbled backward, toppling into the swirling vortex of the Nexus itself. A blinding flash filled the chamber, as Krilloth's own psychic might turned inward, consuming the Overlord in a maelstrom of raw power. The ground beneath their feet began to shake violently. Magma burst through cracks in the floor as the entire facility started to collapse. "Move!" Dennis shouted, leading the mad scramble for the surface. They raced through collapsing tunnels, leaping over rivers of molten rock. The very air seemed to burn in their lungs as they climbed higher and higher. At last they emerged onto the landing pad, where their dropship waited. Sam threw herself into the pilot's seat, firing up the engines as the others piled in. The ship lurched into the air just as the ground gave way beneath them. Dennis watched through the view screen as the Krill stronghold disappeared into a massive sinkhole of churning lava. As they punched through the atmosphere, leaving the doomed moon behind, Dennis allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. They'd struck a crippling blow against the Krill, but he knew the war was a long way to go. The Hyperion's deck shuddered as another salvo from the Krill fleet slammed into their shields. Dennis and his team stumbled onto the bridge, their suits still bearing scorch marks from their harrowing escape. Admiral Krasner turned from the tactical display, his eyes blazing. "Dixon, you magnificent bastard. I didn't think you'd make it back." Dennis nodded, exhaustion etched on his face. "It was close, sir, but we took out their command nexus." "And dealt them a crippling blow," Krasner agreed. His expression darkened. "But I'm afraid our victory may be short-lived." The Admiral gestured to the long-range scanner. A massive shape loomed at the edge of the system, flanked by smaller vessels. "By the stars," Sam breathed. "What is that thing?" "Herald-class dreadnought," Krasner growled. "The pride of the Krill fleet. If it reaches firing range, we're finished." The bridge erupted into frantic activity. Officers barked orders as the Allied ships scrambled into defensive formations. Through the view screen, Dennis watched squadrons of fighters and bombers launch, streaking towards the incoming juggernaut. "Concentrate fire on their forward shields," Krasner bellowed. "We need to punch through before they get in range." The void lit up with a dazzling barrage. Missiles and energy beams slammed into the Herald's defenses, but the massive ship shrugged off the attacks. "No effect, sir," a sensor officer called out. "Their shielding is too strong." Dennis watched in horror as the Herald's main guns began to glow with building energy. "Admiral, we need to pull back, now!" Krasner's teeth gritted. All ships execute tactical retreat pattern Omega. Hit-and-run strikes only. Do not engage their primary weapons. The Allied fleet scattered, smaller ships darting in to harry the Herald's fighter screen before retreating. But with each pass, the dreadnought advanced inexorably closer. Dennis's mind raced. There had to be a way to stop this monster. He studied the tactical readouts, searching for any weakness. Krasner's eyes narrowed. A suicide mission. Maybe not, Dennis argued. We've got Krill tech from our last op. We might be able to fool their sensors long enough to get a team aboard. For a long moment the Admiral was silent. Then he nodded. Do it. Take whoever you need. Within minutes, Dennis had assembled his strike team. Jack and Sam stood ready, along with a squad of battle-hardened Marines. A towering Lethrai warrior named Ryloth rounded out the group. This is insane, Jack muttered, as they climbed into the modified boarding pods. You know that, right? Dennis managed a grim smile. When has that ever stopped us? Instead, there was a bone-jarring impact as the pods latched on. Emergency hatches blew, and Dennis led the charge into the bowels of the Krill dreadnought. They emerged into dimly lit corridors of chitinous metal. For a heartbeat, all was silent. Then alarms blared, and the air filled with the whine of activating security drones. "Contact!" Sam shouted, her rifle spitting fire. The corridor erupted into a maelstrom of plasma bolts and shrapnel. Dennis ducked and weaved, his own weapon blazing. Robotic sentries collapsed in sparking heaps, but more poured in to replace them. Inch by bloody inch, they fought their way deeper into the ship. The Marines moved with brutal efficiency, covering each other as they advanced. Ryloth was a whirlwind of destruction, his energy blade carving through Krill defenses. As they reached a junction, Dennis caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. An entire deck had been converted into a nightmarish prison block. Emaciated aliens of various species huddled in cramped cells, their eyes filled with despair. "We can't leave them," Sam said, her voice tight with anger. Dennis shook his head. "We don't have a choice. If we don't take out that reactor, everyone dies." They pressed on, but the horrors they'd witnessed fueled their dedication. The resistance grew fiercer as they neared the ship's core. Heavily augmented Krill warriors, the infamous Purifier Guard, engaged them in vicious close-quarters combat. In a desperate firefight outside the reactor chamber, Jack took a plasma bolt to the chest. He collapsed against a bulkhead, blood seeping from the wound. Dennis hesitated for a split second, then nodded. He led the remnants of his team to the reactor room's outer airlock. The massive door stood before them, the last obstacle between them and victory. "Charges set," Sam reported. "Ready to blow it on your command." The airlock disintegrated in a thunderous explosion. As the smoke cleared, Dennis's heart sank. The reactor room beyond was open to the void of space. Worse, dozens of terrified prisoners floated inside, tethered to the walls. A voice boomed through hidden speakers, dripping with malice. "Choose, humans. Your victory or these worthless lives. The cost will be high either way." Dennis stared at the helpless captives, then at the titanic reactor that powered the ship of death. The fate of the entire fleet, perhaps the galaxy itself, hung on his next action. Dennis's finger hovered over the detonator. His eyes locked on the terrified faces of the hostages. Time seemed to slow as he wrestled with the impossible choice before him. "I'm sorry," he whispered, squeezing his eyes shut as he pressed the button. The airlock blew open with a thunderous crack. In an instant, the reactor room depressurized. Dennis watched in horror as the prisoners were sucked into the void, their bodies twisting and contorting as the vacuum of space claimed them. Their faces froze in silent screams, ice crystals forming on their skin. Rage boiled up inside him. With a roar of anguish, he smacked his palm down on the charge's trigger. The explosives detonated in a chain reaction, ripping through the reactor core. Alarms blared as the ship shuddered violently. "We need to move now," Dennis shouted, his voice raw. The team sprinted through the twisting corridors. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut behind them as the dreadnought began to tear itself apart. They rounded a corner and came face to face with a squad of krill purifiers. The air filled with plasma fire. Dennis dove behind a fallen support beam, feeling the heat of near misses singe his armor. Sam leaned out from cover, her rifle spitting death. A purifier's head exploded in a shower of gore. "Push through," Dennis ordered, tossing a grenade into the enemy ranks. The explosion sent krill bodies flying. The team surged forward, engaging in brutal close-quarters combat. Ryloth's energy blade flashed, cleaving through purifier armor like paper. They fought their way to the boarding craft, leaving a trail of broken krill in their wake. Sam threw herself into the pilot's seat, her fingers flying over the controls. "Hang on!" she yelled as the craft rocketed out of the docking bay. Dennis gripped the bulkhead as Sam weaved through a hail of defensive fire. The void of space lit up with explosions and weapons fire. Through the view screen, he watched the Herald's hull buckle and warp. Suddenly, the dreadnought vanished in a blinding flash of light. The shockwaves slammed into their craft, sending them tumbling end over end. Sam wrestled with the controls, barely managing to stabilize their trajectory. As the light faded, Dennis saw the human Lethrai fleet pressing the attack. Admiral Krasner's voice crackled over the comms, ordering all ships to engage. Beams of coherent energy lanced out, punching through the krill's wavering defenses. Their tiny craft limped back to the Hyperion as the battle raged around them. Dennis watched krill cruisers break apart under the Allied assault, escape pods jettisoning into the void. But as the last enemy ships fell silent, a chill ran down Dennis's spine. The long-range sensors flashed red. Another krill fleet had arrived, one that dwarfed anything they'd faced before. A massive shape loomed at the center of the krill armada, the despoiler. Its hull stretched for kilometers, filled with weapons that could shatter planets. Dennis felt a wave of despair as he realized the true scope of what they faced. Admiral Krasner's face appeared on the screen, his expression grim. "All ships, initiate emergency jump protocols. We can't win this fight." The Hyperion shuddered as its faster-than-light drives spooled up. Through the hangar force field, Dennis watched Allied ships vanish in flashes of pseudo-motion. The despoiler grew larger, its massive shadow rift cannons glowing with building energy. Jumping in 3, 2, 1. Reality twisted. Stars blurred into streaks of light. The Hyperion plunged into the depths of faster-than-light space, the krill armada in hot pursuit. Dennis sagged against the bulkhead, utterly spent. They'd won the battle, but the war had only just begun, and humanity's fate now hung by the thinnest of threads. The Hyperion shuddered violently as it emerged from its latest jump. Dennis Dixon gripped the command console, his fist clenched. Alarms blared across the bridge as the ship's hull groaned under immense stress. "Multiple hull breaches on decks 3 through 7, an officer called out. "Shields at 12% and falling." Dennis watched in horror as other ships in the fleet began to break apart, torn asunder by invisible forces. The void outside the view screen twisted and warped, reality itself seeming to fracture. Suddenly a massive shape loomed before them. At first, Dennis thought it was another krill dreadnought, but as his eyes focused, he realized it was something far stranger, a colossal ring-shaped structure that dwarfed even the largest ships in their fleet. Before anyone could react, a wave of energy washed over the Hyperion. The ship's systems flickered, then stabilized. The alarms fell silent. "What just happened?" Sam asked, her voice barely above a whisper. As if in answer, the ring structure began to shift and reconfigure. Massive segments realigned, forming an aperture large enough to swallow their entire fleet. Admiral Krasner's face was grim as he studied the sensor readings. "Whatever this thing is, it just saved our asses, and with the krill right behind us, we don't have much choice." He keyed the fleet-wide comm. "All ships, follow us in. Stay alert." The Hyperion led the way, passing through a shimmering energy barrier. Dennis felt a moment of disorientation as they crossed the threshold. When his vision cleared, he gasped. They had entered a vast interior space, impossibly large. Continent-sized structures floated in the distance. Ancient cities sprawled across curved surfaces that stretched beyond the horizon. And everywhere, there were signs of technology far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. "My God," Ryloth rumbled, the Lithrai warrior's eyes wide with awe. "What is this place?" Before anyone could answer, movement caught Dennis's eye. Mechanical constructs of various sizes were stirring to life throughout the megastructure. Some were no larger than humans, while others rivaled small cities in scale. The largest of these automatons approached the fleet, broadcasting a series of complex energy patterns. The Hyperion's computers struggled to interpret the alien signals. "They're offering us sanctuary," a communications officer reported, disbelief evident in her voice, "and resources, but they want to know who we are and why we're here." Dennis exchanged glances with Krasner. The Admiral nodded and Dennis stepped forward. "We accept their offer," he said firmly. "Tell them we're refugees fleeing an overwhelming enemy force. We need repairs, supplies, and any edge we can get against the Krill." As the message was relayed, Dennis and his team prepared to disembark. They needed to learn everything they could about this place, and fast. Hours later, Dennis stood in a cavernous chamber filled with holographic displays. The data they had uncovered painted a chilling picture. "This ring world," he explained to the assembled officers, "was built as a last refuge. Not just for one civilization, but for thousands, maybe millions." Sam frowned. A refuge from what? Dennis manipulated the holograms, revealing images of destruction on a cosmic scale. "We don't know exactly, but whatever it was big enough to threaten entire galaxies. The Ringworld's creators poured unimaginable resources into this place, preparing for the worst." Admiral Krasner's expression darkened. "And now we've stumbled into their sanctuary with the Krill nipping at our heels." Dennis nodded grimly. "Yes, sir, but if we can unlock even a fraction of the technology stored here—" He left the thought unfinished. They all knew what was at stake. Somewhere in this ancient refuge lay the key to humanity's survival. They just had to find it before the Krill found them. Dennis Dixon's boots clanged against the metallic floor as he sprinted through the Ringworld's winding corridors. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Sam Riggs kept pace beside him, her face set in a grim mask of concentration. "How much farther to the Central Archive?" Dennis shouted over the blaring alarms. Sam checked her wrist-mounted holodisplay. 2 more junctions, then we hit the main chamber. They rounded a corner, nearly colliding with a towering Lethrai warrior. Ryloth steadied them with his massive hands, his alien features twisted in what passed for concern. "The human Lethrai science team has made progress," Ryloth rumbled, "but time grows short." Dennis nodded, pushing forward. The trio burst into a cavernous room filled with swirling holograms and pulsing energy conduits. Scientists of various species huddled around consoles, frantically passing streams of alien data. A human researcher waved them over, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and terror. "Commander Dixon, you need to see this." She gestured to a holographic display showing a 3-dimensional star map. A crimson line traced an unmistakable path across the cosmos. That's the Krill's invasion route," Sam whispered. "What is that?" he asked. "We're not entirely sure," the researcher admitted, "but based on the precursor data, we believe it's the origin point of the terminus." Before anyone could respond, the chamber shook violently. Dust rained from the ceiling as the sound of distant explosions echoed through the structure. Admiral Krasner's voice crackled over the comm system. "Dixon, we've got a situation. The Krill have breached the outer defenses. They're inside the ring." Dennis cursed under his breath. "Understood, sir. We'll hold them off as long as we can. Keep working on those precursor archives." He turned to Sam and Ryloth, his lips pursed. "Let's go. We need to buy them more time." The trio raced through the Ringworld's twisting passages, joined by squads of human and Lethrai soldiers. They reached a massive bulkhead just as it began to glow red-hot. Take cover, Dennis shouted. The bulkhead exploded inward in a shower of molten metal. Through the breach poured a nightmarish horde of krill warriors, their chitinous armor gleaming in the harsh light. Dennis raised his pulse rifle, squeezing off controlled bursts. Krill bodies fell, only to be trampled by more of their brethren surging forward. Sam crouched behind a fallen support beam, her sniper rifle cracking with lethal precision. Ryloth waded into the fray, his massive frame a whirlwind of destruction. Krill warriors flew through the air, broken and lifeless. But still they came. Dennis felt a searing pain in his side as a krill energy weapon found its mark. He stumbled, nearly falling. Sam was at his side in an instant, dragging him behind cover. "We can't hold them forever," she shouted over the din of battle. Dennis nodded grimly. "We don't have to. We just need to buy enough time for the science team to unlock the Ringworld's secrets." As if on cue, Admiral Krasner's voice cut through the chaos. "All units fall back to the central chamber. We found something." Dennis and Sam exchanged glances. Whatever the Admiral had discovered, it had better be good. The fate of not just humanity, but all sentient life, hung in the balance. The Ringworld's massive bulkhead groaned as krill assault pods slammed into its outer hull. Dennis Dixon crouched behind a makeshift barricade, his rail rifle pressed tightly against his shoulder. Sweat trickled down his face as he surveyed the cavernous interdiction gateway before him. The bulkhead exploded inward in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Through the breach poured a tide of krill purifier shock troops, their chitinous armor gleaming in the harsh light. Robotic sentries flanked them, scanning for targets with cold mechanical precision. Dennis squeezed the trigger, his rail rifle bucking against his shoulder. Hypersonic projectiles tore through the first wave of krill, leaving smoking craters in their wake. But for every alien that fell, 2 more took its place. "Sam!" Dennis barked into his comm. We need fire support." "On it," Sam's voice crackled back. A moment later, the captured krill weapons platform roared to life. Streams of energy lanced out, cutting swaths through the advancing horde. Purifier guard units attempting to set up artillery positions disintegrated under Sam's pinpoint volleys. Dennis led his team in a series of lightning-fast strikes, darting from cover to cover. They deployed micro-mines and sonic disruptors, sowing chaos in the krill ranks. But the aliens adapted quickly, their commanders coordinating a relentless push deeper into the Ringworld's outer sectors. As Dennis reloaded behind a fallen support strut, a blinding flash erupted behind the coalition lines. He spun, heart racing, to see a group of towering krill materialize out of thin air. Their bodies bristled with cybernetic implants, psionic energy crackling around them. "Interrogation team," Dennis shouted. "They're going for the archives." Ryloth's massive form appeared, leading a group of Lethrai warriors. "We will hold them, human," the alien rumbled. "Focus on the main assault." Dennis watched as Ryloth's forces unleashed a barrage of disruptor fire, attempting to sever the psionic links binding the krill interrogators. But the augmented warriors shrugged off the attacks, advancing with terrifying purpose. Dennis sprinted towards the edge of their rapidly separating section, shouting orders to his team. They leapt across the widening gap, magnetic grapples barely finding purchase on the other side. As Dennis hauled himself up, he saw the interrogation team latch onto a fracturing segment, still intent on reaching the archives. The battle raged on, but now across a shattered, ever-shifting landscape. Dennis regrouped with Sam, who had managed to bring the rail cannon platform across the divide. They fought desperately to keep the krill from bridging the gaps between segments. Suddenly, the air itself seemed to ripple and tear. Matter-antimatter warheads streaked across the battlefield, detonating in blinding flashes that warped the very nature of reality. Entire krill battalions simply ceased to exist, their component atoms scattered to the cosmic winds. "What the hell was that?" Sam yelled, his eyes wide with shock. Dennis shook his head, equally stunned. "I don't know, but I'm glad it's on our side." The metaphysical ordnance bought them precious time, but the krill interrogation team pressed on, somehow resistant to the reality-warping blasts. Dennis rallied his forces for a final, desperate counterattack. Sam gunned the massive weapon's engines, closing the distance to the Krill scions. His fingers danced across the firing controls, unleashing a devastating barrage that shattered the aliens' defensive screens. Dennis led the charge, his rail rifle spitting hypervelocity rounds. The Marines flanked out, catching the interrogators in a crossfire. For a moment, it seemed they might prevail. Then the lead Krill interrogator stepped forward, a nightmarish fusion of alien flesh and machine. It towered over Dennis, its mind radiating waves of psychic force that made his teeth ache. Beside him, Ryloth snarled a challenge. "For Earth!" Dennis roared, charging forward. The three collided in a maelstrom of blazing energy and flashing blades. Dennis's combat knife sparked as it scraped across the Krill's armored hide. Ryloth's massive fists pummeled the creature, each blow powerful enough to shatter stone. But the interrogator was too strong, too heavily augmented. It batted Dennis aside, sending him sprawling. Ryloth bellowed in pain as psychic energy lashed across his mind. Then, in a move of desperate courage, Ryloth lunged forward. He wrapped his arms around the Krill, pinning its limbs. The Lethrai warrior's eyes locked with Dennis's for a brief moment. "Finish it," Ryloth growled. Dennis scrambled to his feet, seeing the pulsing power matrix behind the grappling pair. He fired, his rail rifle round punching through Ryloth and into the unstable energy core. A scream of tortured physics filled the air. Reality itself seemed to twist and tear around Ryloth and the Krill interrogator. In a blinding flash, both vanished, ripped apart by the very fabric of space-time. Silence fell across the battlefield. The remaining Krill forces, their psychic leadership destroyed, fell into disarray. Dennis sagged against a fallen bulkhead, exhaustion threatening to overwhelm him. But there was no time to rest. Even as they began to regroup, long-range sensors blared a warning. Dennis's blood ran cold as he saw the readings. An immense Krill armada was inbound, led by the dreaded Shadow Despoiler itself. He keyed his comm, his voice hoarse. "All units, prepare for another assault. This isn't over yet." Dennis Dixon's boots pounded the shattered pavement as he sprinted through the ruined cityscape. Blinding flashes lit up the sky, followed by deafening booms that shook the ground beneath his feet. He dove behind a crumbling wall, just as a Krill dropship screamed overhead, its energy weapons scorching the street where he'd stood moments before. "Hawkins, what's your status?" Dennis barked into his comm. Static crackled. Then Jack Hawkins' voice came through, strained and breathless. "We're pinned down on 17th Avenue. These bastards have minefields everywhere. I've lost 3 tanks already." Dennis surveyed the chaos around him. Coalition soldiers traded fire with Krill shock troops across debris-strewn boulevards, the air filled with the acrid stench of burning metal and ozone. "Hold position," Dennis ordered. "I'm bringing reinforcements." He signaled to a nearby squad of Lethrai commandos. Their squad leader, a hulking figure named Kaznar, loped over on all fours. "We go to aid the human armor," Dennis explained, gesturing towards the distant sounds of heavy fighting. Kaznar bared his teeth in what passed for a Lethrai grin. "We crush Krill skulls, good plan." The mixed team of humans and Lethrai moved swiftly through the ruins, using the Ringworld's transit tunnels to bypass Krill strongpoints. As they neared Hawkins' position, a massive shape loomed out of the smoke and debris. Dennis stared up at the colossal form of a Krill siege walker. Its spindly legs crushed vehicles and buildings alike. As it advanced, multiple weapon arrays swiveling to track targets. The walker's main gun fired, unleashing a searing beam of energy that vaporized everything in its path. Dennis felt the heat wash over him as he pressed himself into a recessed doorway. Suddenly the ground trembled. A deep, resonant hum filled the air. Dennis watched in awe as a titanic form unfolded from the very structure of the ring world itself. The caretaker automaton towered over even the Krill walker, its surface rippling with otherworldly energies. The two giants clashed in a furious battle that defied description. Reality itself seemed to warp and twist around them as they exchanged blows that could level cities. Taking advantage of the distraction, Dennis led his team towards Hawkins's position. They found the Coalition armor unit hunkered down behind the burned-out husks of their destroyed tanks. "Glad to see you, Dixon," Hawkins said, his face streaked with grime and blood. "But I don't know how much longer we can hold out here." Dennis nodded grimly. "We need to fall back to—" His words were cut off as the sky above them split open. The Shadow Despoiler's rift cannons tore through the fabric of space-time, unleashing devastation on an unimaginable scale. Entire sections of the ring world simply ceased to exist, leaving behind yawning voids of nothingness. "All units, emergency retreat." Admiral Krasner's voice crackled over the comms. "Fall back to designated safe zones immediately." Dennis helped Hawkins to his feet. "You heard the man, let's move." As they retreated through the disintegrating cityscape, Dennis caught glimpses of the larger battle raging around them. Krill dropships dueled with captured fighters piloted by Sam and his squadron. The Ringworld's own defenses lashed out with weapons that defied comprehension, warping the very nature of reality to strike at the invaders. They reached a hardened bunker complex just as another volley from the Shadow Despoiler scoured the area behind them. Dennis sealed the blast doors, his hands shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. "What now?" Hawkins asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Dennis took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Now we hold the line, and pray that whatever the eggheads discover in those archives is enough to turn the tide." Outside, the battle raged on. The Shadow Despoiler loomed ever closer, its weapons tearing apart the very fabric of existence. Yet the Ringworld fought back with equal fury, unleashing energies that threatened to unmake the universe itself. The ground shook beneath Dennis Dixon's feet as another shadow rift blast tore through the Ringworld's outer sectors. He steadied himself against a crumbling wall, eyes scanning the horizon where the Despoiler's massive form blotted out the stars. "All units, form up!" Dennis shouted into his comm. "Defensive positions along the archive perimeter. We hold this line no matter what." Coalition troops scrambled to obey, taking cover behind twisted debris and hastily erected barricades. The air crackled with tension as they awaited the Krill onslaught. High above, Sam Riggs led his fighter wing in a desperate attack run on the Despoiler. His captured Krill bomber bucked and weaved through a hail of energy bolts. "Fox 3, Sam called out, releasing a salvo of missiles. They streaked towards the Dreadnought's forward cannon arrays, detonating in blinding flashes. For a moment, hope surged. Then the smoke cleared, revealing minimal damage to the Despoiler's hardened hull. "Evasive maneuvers!" Sam yelled as the Dreadnought's auxiliary batteries opened up. Space lit up with deadly crossfire. A nearby fighter disintegrated, its pilot's scream cut short. Sam's own craft shuddered as glancing hits tore into its armor. On the ground, Jack Hawkins gritted his teeth as his tank column advanced. Krill Purifier heavy walkers loomed ahead, their massive forms dwarfing even the Coalition's heaviest armor. "Concentrate fire on the lead walker," Jack ordered. "Gravimetric lances, full power." A storm of munitions erupted from the Coalition tanks. Hypervelocity rounds sparked off the walker's shields, while gravimetric beams warped and buckled its armor. For a heartbeat, it seemed the assault might succeed. Then the walker strode forward, shrugging off the barrage like rain. "They're not stopping," a panicked voice called out over the comm. "We can't—" The transmission cut off as a Krill energy blast vaporized the tank. Jack watched in horror as his forces were slowly pushed back, the transport hub slipping from their grasp. A deafening roar filled the air as colossal Ringworld arcology citadels strode into battle. Their ancient forms bristled with weaponry beyond human comprehension. For a moment it seemed the tide might turn. Then the Despoiler unleashed its full fury. Shadow Rift blasts lanced out, reality itself twisting and tearing where they struck. One by one the mighty constructs toppled, reduced to rubble and twisted metal. Centuries of knowledge and power erased in seconds. Admiral Krasner's voice crackled over the command frequency. "All units brace for impact. Deploying precursor armaments." A blinding flash erupted from the Coalition's rearguard. Dennis watched in awe as antimatter warheads augmented with micro-singularities detonated along the despoiler's flanks. Space itself seemed to warp and tear, entire sections of the dreadnought's hull simply ceasing to exist. For a brief shining moment, victory seemed within reach. Then, with terrifying speed, the despoiler's systems reactivated. Its command nexus remained intact, protected by layers of unimaginable technology. "Incoming!" Dennis shouted as Krill assault landers punched through reality itself, materializing within the Ringworld's interior hub. The archives and the terrible secrets they held lay exposed. Dennis, Jack, and Sam converged at the outermost gallery, rallying what remained of their forces. They knew the stakes. If the Krill accessed the Ringworld's full knowledge, all hope for the galaxy would be lost. Waves of Purifier assault troops poured through dimensional gateways, their augmented forms dripping with weapons that defied the laws of physics. Dennis raised his rifle, knowing that this was humanity's last stand. As the battle raged, strange energies began to pulse from deep within the archive core. Ancient systems, dormant for eons, stirred to life. Dennis felt a chill run down his spine, sensing that something far beyond their understanding was about to awaken. The fate of all life in the galaxy hung in the balance as human, alien, and machine clashed in the shadows of long-forgotten secrets. And in the darkness of the archive's heart, something ancient and terrible began to stir. The archive's cavernous halls erupted in chaos, as waves of Krill Purifier assault troopers poured through shimmering gateways. Dennis Dixon's eyes widened at the sight of their singularity-shielded carapaces, watching in horror as concentrated railgun fire simply dissipated against the alien armor. Jack Hawkins' voice crackled over the comm. "Dixon, we're repositioning tanks to create overlapping fields of fire. It's our best shot at thinning their numbers." Dennis nodded grimly, watching as Jack's remaining armor units maneuvered into place. The tanks opened fire in a synchronized barrage, their cannons thundering in unison. Krill warriors disintegrated under the onslaught, but for each that fell, 2 more stepped through the gateways to take their place. Searing plasma bolts lanced out from the Krill ranks, gouging molten craters in the archive's once pristine marble floors. Dennis dove behind a fallen pillar, the heat of near misses singeing his skin. "Copy that," Sam Riggs replied, his voice tight with concentration. "Wing, form up on me, we're going in hot." Dennis peered out from cover to see Sam's strike wing screaming through the vast interior space. Autoblaster fire raked the Krill's forward ranks, while gravimetric lances punched holes in their formations. For a moment it seemed the tide might turn. Then a blinding flash erupted as Purifier flak batteries found their mark. Sam's fighter tumbled end over end, trailing fire and debris. "Sam!" Dennis cried out, but there was no response. With a snarl of rage, Dennis hefted a particle lance he'd scavenged from a fallen Purifier. He squeezed the trigger, unleashing a torrent of sapphire energy that scythed through the alien ranks. Krill warriors screamed as their flesh was flayed from augmented bone, but still they pressed forward. "We can't hold them," a Lethrai commando bellowed, his claws tearing into a Purifier's faceplate. Just as all seemed lost, reality itself seemed to ripple. Glowing barriers of pure energy sprang into existence, momentarily halting the Krill advance. Admiral Krasner's voice rang out over the command frequency. "All units, brace yourselves, we're activating the Harrowers." The very air hummed with potential as ancient vaults deep within the archives burst open. Dennis watched in awe as tendrils of scintillating energy unfurled, like fractal blossoms, lancing through both the interdiction barriers and the Krill ranks with equal ease. Where the energy touched, Purifier troops simply ceased to exist. Their armor, their weapons, their very beings unraveled at the quantum level. "By the stars," Dennis breathed, watching as a Harrower took physical form. Its iridescent body blazed with eldritch power as it glided through the battlefield, erasing Krill warriors with each passing touch. The Coalition troops surged forward, exploiting gaps in the disorganized Krill lines. Jack's tanks punched through weakened defensive pockets, while what remained of Sam's fighter wing unleashed a devastating barrage against the looming form of the shadow despoiler itself. For a precious few moments, victory seemed within reach. Then a fresh wave of Krill reinforcements poured through auxiliary gateways. These new troops bristled with strange weaponry Dennis had never seen before. "New contacts," Jack's voice crackled over the comm. "They're targeting the Harrower." Dennis watched in horror as hyper-energized beams lashed out, sizzling across the Harrower's transdimensional force field. The AI's radiant form began to unravel, its higher-order matrices rupturing like burst stars. An unearthly shriek echoed across dimensions as the Harrower imploded, collapsing into a swirling vortex of probability. In an instant, one of the Ringworld's mightiest defenders was simply gone. The Krill resumed their relentless advance, surging toward the heart of the archives. Dennis gripped his weapon tighter, knowing that everything now hinged on reaching the precursor core first. "Krasner," he shouted into his comm, "we need that final contingency now." As the Purifier legions closed in, Dennis couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time and options. Dennis Dixon pressed his back against the pulsating flesh of the Maw, his eyes wide, as he watched the impossible unfold before him. The archive's cavernous halls, once a sanctuary of knowledge, now writhed with cosmic horror beyond comprehension. "What the hell is that thing?" Jack Hawkins' voice crackled through Dennis's comm, thick with static and disbelief. Dennis swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I think it's our last hope, Jack." The Maw's tendrils lashed out, snatching Krill purifiers from existence. One moment the alien warriors stood poised to strike. The next, they simply ceased to be, their matter and energy consumed by the eldritch entity. A Lethrai commando crouched next to Dennis, his scaled skin glistening with sweat. "By the void, I've never seen anything like this." They watched as the Maw's undulating form swept through the archive, devouring everything in its path. Krill war machines, advanced weaponry, even chunks of the archive itself, all vanished into the creature's gullet. The air crackled with energy as reality itself buckled under the strain. Dennis felt a pressure building in his skull, a cosmic wrongness that threatened to overwhelm his senses. "Look," the Lethrai pointed with a clawed hand. Dennis followed his gaze, his heart sinking. A new wave of Krill forces pushed through the chaos, the Command Arcanauts. Their cybernetic forms bristled with arcane technology, fields of shimmering energy deflecting the Maw's attempts to consume them. "How are they doing that?" Dennis breathed. The Arcanauts advanced, their synchronized movement speaking of a hive-mind intelligence. Where the Maw's tendrils struck, they simply parted, allowing the cybernetic monstrosities to pass unharmed. A deafening screech tore through the air as the Maw recoiled. Dennis watched in horror as the Arcanauts unleashed streams of data, weaponized information that seemed to corrupt the very essence of the cosmic entity. "It's faltering," the Lethrai hissed. "We can't let them win." Dennis gripped his particle lance tighter, his fingers tightening. What can we do against that? The archive shuddered as the titanic forces clashed. Reality itself seemed to warp and twist, the laws of physics breaking down in the face of such impossible power. "Dennis!" Admiral Krasner's voice cut through the chaos. "We're detecting energy fluctuations. The Maw, it's trying to reach critical mass." Dennis's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "It's going to consume everything." "Affirmative," Krasner confirmed, "including us if we don't find a way to stop it or escape." The survivors huddled behind the Maw's pulsating form, watching as the cosmic horror battled the Krill's most elite forces. Dennis knew they stood at the precipice of annihilation, yet the alternative was unthinkable. "We have to let it happen," Dennis said, his voice barely above a whisper. The Lethrai turned to him, mandibles clicking in agitation. "You can't be serious." Dennis met his alien comrade's gaze. "If the Krill get what they came for, it's over for everyone. At least this way." He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. The cosmic dread of their situation pressed down on him, threatening to crush his spirit. The archive trembled again, more violently this time. Dennis watched as cracks spread across the once pristine floors, reality itself splintering under the strain of the impossible battle raging before them. "Hold the line!" Dennis shouted to the remaining coalition forces. "Whatever happens, we can't let the krill reach the core." As if in response to his words, the Moor let out another reality-shaking cry. Its form seemed to expand, growing ever larger as it consumed more and more of its surroundings. Dennis braced himself, knowing that they now stood at the edge of oblivion. The future of the stars hung in the balance, teetering between extinction at the hands of the krill or annihilation by the very force they had unleashed to save themselves. The archive's walls began to dissolve, reality itself unraveling as the Moor reached for totality. Dennis closed his eyes, silently praying that their sacrifice would be enough to stop the krill threat once and for all. The thunderous impact shook Dennis to his core as he crouched behind the Moor's undulating mass. Chunks of debris rained down, pinging off his armor. He peered around the eldritch entity's coiled segment, eyes widening at the sight before him. Krill siege drills burst through the far wall in a shower of pulverized stone and twisted metal. The massive machines ground to a halt, their drill bits still spinning and smoking. Hatches flew open with pneumatic hisses, disgorging waves of purifier troopers. Their augmented forms bristled with weaponry that seemed to warp the very air around them. "Incoming!" Dennis bellowed, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of battle. The krill forces split, one group surging toward the Moor while another charged directly at Dennis and his beleaguered defenders. Dennis felt his stomach drop as he realized they were about to be overwhelmed. "Jack!" he shouted into his calm. "We need armor support now." "On it!" Jack's voice crackled back. "All tanks concentrate fire on their right flank." Dennis watched as Jack's remaining tank platoon pivoted, their turrets swinging in unison. The air itself seemed to ripple as they unleashed a devastating barrage. High-explosive rounds detonated among the krill ranks, while gravimetric lances warped space-time itself. For a moment it seemed the krill advance might falter. Then the smoke cleared, revealing the aliens pushing forward. Their singularity shields flared and pulsed, having absorbed the worst of the assault. "It's not enough," a Lethrai commando snarled, his mandibles clicking in frustration. The alien warrior hefted a bulky plasma caster, unleashing searing bolts of energy. Where they struck, krill armor bubbled and melted, but still the purifiers came on. Dennis gritted his teeth, knowing they had to buy more time. "Marines!" he shouted. "Form up on me! Defensive line now!" The human soldiers scrambled to obey, forming a ragged line. Dennis raised his railgun, sighting down its length. "Hold steady," he commanded. "Wait for it." The krill closed in, their alien forms becoming clear in horrifying detail. Cybernetic augmentations meshed with twisted flesh, eyes glowing with murderous intent. "Fire!" A wall of hypervelocity projectiles erupted from the human weapons. The air itself ignited from the friction. Krill warriors stumbled and fell, xenoblood spraying in arterial jets. But for each that dropped, two more took its place. A massive shape loomed behind the purifier ranks. Dennis's blood ran cold as he recognized a krill heavy walker. The behemoth stomped forward, each step leaving pools of molten glass in its wake. Its devastator cannons swiveled, targeting Jack's tanks. Too late. Searing beams of plasma lanced out, cutting through tank armor seamlessly. Dennis watched in horror as one of Jack's vehicles went up in a fireball, its ammunition cooking off. "It's not working," a Marine cried out. "We can't stop that thing." Dennis's eyes darted frantically, searching for anything that might turn the tide. His gaze fell on a bulky weapon platform nearby, an experimental X-laser. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward it. "Cover me," he shouted, diving behind the weapon's controls. Dennis's fingers flew over the unfamiliar interface, praying he remembered the briefing correctly. The X-laser hummed to life, energy building to near uncontainable levels. He swung the targeting reticle toward the krill walker, holding his breath as he depressed the firing stud. A blinding beam of concentrated gamma radiation lanced out, slamming into the walker's forward shields. For an agonizing moment, nothing happened. Then fractures appeared in the energy barrier, spreading like cracks in glass. The beam punched through, slicing into the walker's armored hide. Metal bubbled and ran like water. Internal systems ruptured, venting superheated plasma. The titanic war machine ground to a halt, its devastator cannons falling silent. "Fall back," Dennis ordered, seizing the moment of respite. "Everyone, to the far chambers, move!" As they retreated, Dennis cast a final glance at the Maw. The cosmic entity's form seemed to waver and distort, entire segments imploding into nothingness. He knew with sickening certainty that their last line of defense was crumbling. Unless they could reach the precursor core first, all would be lost. Dennis Dixon's eyes widened as he watched reality unravel before him. The precursor vault's entrance pulsed with otherworldly energies, spewing forth a tide of impossible geometries that defied comprehension. "Fall back," he roared, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of destruction. "Everyone to the gateway portals." The surviving coalition forces scrambled to obey, their faces etched with terror, as they witnessed entire krill legions erased from existence. Where the Maw's tendrils swept, alien warriors simply ceased to be, their very atoms scattered across dimensions. Jack Hawkins' voice crackled over the comm. "Dennis, we're losing cohesion. The tanks can't maintain formation in this, whatever the hell this is." Dennis watched as one of Jack's armored vehicles warped and twisted, its metal frame stretching like taffy, before imploding into a singularity. He swallowed hard, fighting back the rising tide of panic. A Lithrai commando stumbled, its reptilian features contorting as reality fluctuated around it. Dennis grabbed the alien's arm, hauling it upright. "Stay with me, soldier!" They pressed on, dodging fractal patterns that carved swaths of annihilation through the battlefield. Dennis clutched the X-laser, its weight a comforting anchor in the sea of chaos. "Admiral Krasner," he shouted into his comm, "we need an exit strategy now." Static filled the channel for agonizing seconds before Krasner's voice broke through. "Working on it, Dixon. The gateway protocols are destabilizing. We're trying to lock onto your signatures, but the dimensional flux is interfering with targeting." Dennis cursed, his eyes scanning the writhing landscape for any sign of escape. The Maw's form had become a kaleidoscope of impossibility, its tendrils weaving in and out of reality. A krill arcanut loomed before them, its cybernetic frame somehow resisting the tide of uncreation. Dennis raised the X-laser, squeezing the trigger. The beam lanced out, carving through the alien's defenses. For a moment, the arcanut stood motionless. Then its body unfolded like origami, collapsing into a singularity that winked out of existence. "There!" A Marine pointed toward a shimmering distortion in the air. "Is that a portal?" Dennis squinted, hope flaring in his chest. The rippling anomaly pulsed with energy, a possible lifeline amidst the chaos. They surged forward, dodging cascading waves of unreality. Dennis felt his skin crawl as a causal energies washed over him, threatening to unwrite his very existence. Jack Hawkins appeared at his side, face streaked with sweat and grime. "Dennis, we're not all going to make it." Dennis gritted his teeth. "We have to try." They reached the anomaly, its surface rippling like quicksilver. One by one, survivors hurled themselves through, vanishing in flashes of light. Dennis turned, watching as the Maw's tendrils reached for them, reality itself bending and breaking in its wake. He knew they were out of time. "Go!" he shouted, shoving Jack toward the portal. "I'll hold them off." Jack hesitated for a split second, then nodded grimly. He stepped through the threshold, leaving Dennis alone on the precipice of oblivion. Dennis raised the X-laser one final time, its energy reserves nearly depleted. He fired into the oncoming wave of unreality, a defiant last stand against the forces that threatened to consume everything. As the extinction protocol reached its crescendo, Dennis closed his eyes and stepped backward into the portal. He felt reality twist and stretch around him, his consciousness fragmenting across dimensions. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the Moor's writhing form, consuming the ring world in a bloom of existential undoing. Dennis stumbled as the deck beneath him shuddered violently. Klaxons wailed, their shrill cry piercing through the chaos on the Hyperion's bridge. He grabbed a nearby console to steady himself, his eyes fixed on the tactical hologram flickering before him. "Stabilize our position," Admiral Krasner barked, his face illuminated by the red emergency lighting. "Get those hull breaches sealed now." Crew members scrambled to obey, their fingers flying over consoles as they fought to keep the battered ship together. Dennis watched as the holographic representation of their fleet dwindled before his eyes. Ships winked out one by one, consumed by the voracious maw of space or crippled beyond function. Dennis's heart raced as he saw the massive wedge of the enemy flagship slice through the starfield, its form seeming to devour the light around it. He turned to Krasner, his voice tight. "Sir, we need options. Now." Krasner's eyes narrowed as he assessed their dire situation. "Engineering, what's the status on our quantum drive?" "It's shot, sir," came the frantic reply. "The last jump fried half the coils. We're running on emergency power." Dennis felt the weight of their predicament settle on his shoulders. He looked around at the remaining crew, human and Lethrai alike, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear. The realization hit him like a physical blow. They were out of time, out of luck, and nearly out of hope. A proximity alarm shrieked, cutting through the din. On the main view screen, Dennis watched as the Krill dreadnought unleashed a barrage of energy weapons. Space itself seemed to warp and twist as the beams lanced toward them. "Brace for impact," Krasner roared. Dennis gritted his teeth, his fingers tightening as he gripped the console. The Hyperion bucked and heaved as the enemy fire found its mark. Sparks erupted from overloaded systems, and the acrid smell of burning circuitry filled the air. Through the chaos, Dennis's mind raced. They couldn't run, couldn't hide, and couldn't hope to win in a straight fight. There was only one option left, one final, daring plan. He turned to Krasner, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his gut. "Admiral, we need to take the fight to them. It's our only shot." Krasner's eyes met his, understanding passing between them in an instant. The older man nodded grimly. "You're right. We end this now, one way or another." Dennis felt a surge of grim satisfaction. He tapped his comm unit, his voice ringing out across what remained of their battered fleet. "All hands, this is Commander Dixon. Prepare for close-quarters assault on the Krill flagship. This is our last stand. Make it count." As the crew rushed to battle stations, Dennis caught sight of the Krill dreadnought looming ever closer on the interface. Its hull bristled with weapons, each capable of obliterating what was left of their forces. Yet as he watched the enemy approach, Dennis felt a fierce drive settle over him. They'd come too far, sacrificed too much to give up now. Win or lose, they would face their destiny head-on. "Helm, plot an intercept course," Krasner commanded, his voice filled with iron drive. "Weapons target their primary systems. We're going to hit them with everything we've got." The Hyperion's engines flared to life, pushing the wounded ship forward on a collision course with their nemesis. Dennis braced himself, knowing that the next few moments would determine the fate of not just their crew, but of all humanity. As they closed the gap, he allowed himself one final thought of Earth, of home of all they fought to protect. Then he pushed it aside, focusing entirely on the battle to come. The Krill dreadnought filled their view now, its titanic bulk dwarfing their own vessel. Dennis saw the flash of enemy weapons preparing to fire, knowing they had seconds left before impact. "All hands," Krasner's voice boomed, steady and resolute. "Prepare to engage." The stealth craft's engines pulsed silently as Sam guided them through the debris field surrounding the half-constructed battle station. Dennis's eyes darted between tactical readouts, searching for any sign their approach had been detected. "Radiation signature still masked," Sam reported, his voice low. "No change in drone activity." Dennis nodded, his fingers tightening on the edge of the command console. "Take us in slow. Praxar, ready the boarding pods." The Lethrai commando chittered an acknowledgement, moving to the airlock with fluid grace. The Marines fell in behind him, checking seals on their salvaged krill armor. As they closed on the battle station, its true scale became apparent. Even unfinished, it dwarfed their craft, a hulking mass of alloys and weaponry. Construction drones swarmed its surface like insects, oblivious to the intruders in their midst. "There," Dennis pointed to a gaping access hatch. "That's our entry point." Sam eased the craft alongside the opening, matching velocity perfectly. With a hiss of equalizing pressure, the airlock cycled open. They surged forward, mag boots engaging as they touched down inside the krill vessel. Dennis's HUD flared to life, overlaying schematics recovered from the Ringworld archives. "Primary capacitor chamber should be 2 levels down," he transmitted. "Move fast, stay quiet." They advanced through half-finished corridors, ducking under hanging cables and stepping over discarded tools. The lack of internal gravity lent an eerie silence to their progress. At a junction, Dennis held up a fist. A pair of maintenance drones hovered past, manipulators clicking as they worked. Once clear, the team pressed on. They reached a sealed bulkhead, its control panel dark. Praxar slithered forward, mandibles working as he interfaced with the krill systems. With a soft chime, the door slid open. Beyond lay a cavernous chamber dominated by a pulsing orb of contained energy, the battle station's beating heart. Tendrils of lightning arced between focusing arrays, barely contained by flickering force fields. A bone-rattling klaxon cut him off. Red emergency lights bathed the chamber as the battle station's systems surged to life. Dennis's mind raced. They were out of time, out of options. He saw only one path forward. Dennis's fingers flew across the uplink interface, sweat beading on his forehead as he raced to decrypt the overload protocols. The vast chamber hummed with barely contained energy, capacitor columns towering overhead like silent sentinels. "How much longer?" Praxar hissed, his mandibles clicking nervously as he kept watch on the sealed entrance. "Almost there," Dennis muttered, eyes locked on the scrolling data. A satisfying chime signaled his success. "Got it. Initiating overload sequence now." The chamber's ambient hum rose to a deafening whine as power surged through the battle station's systems. Warning klaxons blared, their shrill cry echoing through the corridors. "Move!" Dennis shouted, yanking his hand away from the console as arcs of energy began to dance across its surface. The team sprinted for the exit, boots pounding against the metal deck plating. They piled through the blast doors, Praxar's clawed hands slamming the emergency seal controls. The reinforced barriers slammed shut, just as a wave of searing energy washed over them. "Firing solution locked," Dennis called out, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of alarms and groaning metal. "Everybody clear the core." They retreated down twisting corridors, the entire structure shuddering around them. Sparks rained down from ruptured conduits, acrid smoke filling the air. "There!" A Marine pointed to a viewport, revealing the vast expanse of space beyond. Dennis pressed his face to the transparent material, watching in awe as the battle station's main cannons rotated ponderously. A blinding lance of energy erupted from the barrels, cutting across the inky void. The beam struck one of the massive krill defense platforms. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the platform's shields flared brilliantly before collapsing entirely. Entire sections of armor peeled away, disintegrating in the wake of the devastating blast. "It worked," Dennis breathed, a fierce grin spreading across his face. "We've punched our hole." His elation was short-lived as the deck lurched violently beneath their feet. The detonation of their stealth craft's singularity drive sent shockwaves through the battle station's superstructure. "This whole place is coming apart," Praxar shouted, steadying himself against a bulkhead. "We need to get out of here." Dennis nodded grimly, keying his comm unit. "Sam, do you copy? What's your status?" Static crackled before Sam's voice came through, breathless but alive. "Made it out in an escape pod. I can see your position. There's a lot of debris between us, but I think I can reach you. Negative, Dennis replied, watching as krill interceptors swarmed the wreckage outside. There's too much heat. Get clear and activate your beacon. We'll find another way out. As they moved deeper into the crumbling battle station, Dennis caught glimpses of Krasner's fleet through shattered viewports. The battered human and Lethrai ships surged forward, guns blazing as they engaged the krill defenses. Dennis's fingers closed around the grip of his sidearm, the weapon feeling impossibly small against the looming threat. His suit's power flickered, the heads-up display sputtering with static. Through the haze, he saw the first Ravager take a thunderous step forward, its massive foot crushing the twisted remains of a dropship. The air crackled with energy as the Ravager's disruptor beam powered up. Dennis rolled to his left, narrowly avoiding the searing blast that left a glassy crater where he'd stood moments before. He came up firing, his sidearm's plasma bolts splattering harmlessly against the behemoth's armored hide. "Praxar, Sam, anyone copy?" Dennis shouted into his comm, but only static answered. The shipyard had become a dead zone, choked with interference from the nuclear detonation. A second Ravager lumbered into view, its viral techs whirring to life. Dennis's suit screamed warnings of mutagenic contamination as he scrambled for cover behind a fallen support strut. The air around him shimmered with deadly particulates, eating away at his armor's already compromised integrity. Dennis's breath came in ragged gasps as he assessed his options. His particle lance lay several meters away, knocked from his grasp by the initial blast. Without it, he stood no chance against these monstrosities. The ground shook as the Ravagers advanced, their heavy footfalls sending tremors through the ruined deck plating. Dennis tensed, ready to make a desperate dash for his weapon. Suddenly, a familiar chittering sound cut through the chaos. "Commander, down!" Dennis dropped flat as a barrage of plasma fire streaked overhead. Praxar and two surviving Lethrai commandos had emerged from the smoke, their weapons blazing. The concentrated fire staggered the nearest Ravager, its shields flaring under the assault. "Move your ass, human!" Praxar shouted, mandibles clicking furiously as he laid down covering fire. Dennis didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted for his particle lance, scooping it up in one fluid motion. As he turned, he saw one of the Lethrai fall, cut in half by a molecular disintegrator beam. Praxar's remaining commando tossed something small and cylindrical towards the Ravagers. "Fire in the hole!" The gravity bomb detonated with a thunderous crack, warping space-time around the massive xenoborgs. Their armor buckled and twisted under impossible stresses, giving Dennis the opening he needed. He raised his particle lance, the weapon humming to life. "Eat this, you oversized toasters!" A stream of coherent energy lashed out, bypassing the Ravagers' shields and slicing through their compromised armor. One toppled with an earth-shaking crash, its systems overloading in a spectacular display of pyrotechnics. The second Ravager swiveled its gun arms, preparing to unleash hell, but before it could fire, a familiar voice crackled over the comms. Dennis looked up to see a squadron of Lethrai bombers screaming in low, their payload bays opening. He grabbed Praxar by the arm and ran, the Lethrai warrior dragging his wounded comrade. Behind them, the world turned to fire and fury as the bombers carpeted the area with high-yield plasma charges. The remaining Ravager disappeared in the conflagration, along with a significant portion of the shipyard's superstructure. As the dust settled, Dennis surveyed the carnage. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but at a terrible cost. Bodies and wreckage littered the scarred landscape as far as the eye could see. "The status report," he rasped into his comm, hoping the channel had cleared. After a moment of static, Sam's voice came through, weak but alive. "We're still in the fight, Commander, but we've got heavy casualties across all sectors. The krill are regrouping for a counterattack." Dennis nodded grimly, checking his weapon's charge. "Then we'd better dig in. This battle's nowhere near the end." The Lethrai warrior's compound eyes gleamed with a mix of sorrow and fierce dedication. "Enough to make the krill pay, human. Enough for that." As if to punctuate his words, a fresh wave of explosions bloomed in the distance. The krill were coming, and they were coming in force. Dennis raised his particle lance, ready to meet whatever horrors emerged from the smoke and fire. The real test of humanity's persistence was only just beginning. Dennis's boots crunched on the scorched metal as he sprinted across the blasted landscape. The air crackled with energy, ozone stinging his nostrils through his suit's compromised filters. Behind him, the perfect sphere of nothingness yawned, a testament to the raw destructive power they'd unleashed. "Move it, people!" he barked, waving his team forward. "Those dropships won't wait forever." Sam stumbled, his leg armor sparking from a glancing hit. Dennis grabbed his arm, half dragging him over a twisted bulkhead. The Lethrai warrior Praxar chittered urgently, mandibles clicking as he provided covering fire. A krill exosuit burst from a pile of debris, its plasmacaster glowing hot. Dennis dropped, pulling Sam down with him as the alien's shot seared the air where they'd been standing. Praxar's return fire shredded the krill's barriers, and a marine finished it with a well-placed grenade. "Krasner, we need that corridor now," Dennis shouted into his comm. Static crackled, then the Admiral's voice cut through. Dennis cursed, scanning the chaos around them. Hundreds of meters still separated them from the nearest landing zone. Ravager footsteps thundered in the distance, growing closer. "New plan," he growled, gesturing to a half-collapsed hangar bay. "We make our stand there. Sam, get that portable shield generator online. Praxar, I need your best sharpshooters on Overwatch." They scrambled into position, the ragtag band of survivors forming a rough perimeter. Dennis felt the hum of the shield generator powering up, a shimmering dome of energy encasing their position. The first wave of krill troops hit like a battering ram. Molecular disruptors screeched, eating away at the shield's integrity. Dennis and his team returned fire, their weapons seeming pitifully inadequate against the alien onslaught. A Marine screamed as a viral tech round found a gap in his armor, his body twisting grotesquely as the mutagenic payload rewrote his DNA. Dennis gritted his teeth, focusing his fire on the krill heavy weapons teams. "Incoming!" Praxar shrieked. Dennis looked up to see a Ravager, towering and terrible, stomping through the carnage toward their position. The shield flickered on the verge of collapse. Sam worked frantically to reroute power, his fingers flying over the generator's controls. "I can give you maybe 30 more seconds." Dennis raised his particle lance, knowing it would barely scratch the behemoth's armor. But before he could fire, a familiar shriek split the air. Lethrai bombers screamed overhead, their payloads finding their marks with deadly precision. Anti-armor munitions slammed into the Ravager, breaching its singularity shielding. The Xenoborg staggered, its primary disruptor cannon erupting in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. "Now!" Dennis roared, emptying his sidearm into the monster's exposed joints. Explosive slugs tore through alien servomotors and power conduits. With a ground-shaking crash, the Ravager toppled, momentarily clearing a path to the landing zone. "Go, go, go!" Dennis shouted, half carrying Sam as they broke from cover. Praxar and the surviving Lethrai laid down suppressing fire, stemming the tide of krill reinforcements long enough for the team to reach the waiting dropships. As they piled into the craft, Dennis saw fresh waves of krill pouring from their fortifications. The dropship's engines roared to life, pressing them into their seats as it rocketed skyward. Through the viewport, Dennis watched the shipyard recede, a hellscape of fire and twisted metal. "We're not out of this yet," Sam cautioned, his face grim as he studied the tactical readouts. "Krasner's fleet is taking a pounding, and those krill battlecruisers are closing fast." Dennis nodded, his mind already racing ahead to the next phase of the battle. They'd struck a blow, created an opening. Now came the real test, turning this hard-won momentum into the final push that would shatter the krill war machine once and for all. The dropship shuddered as it punched through the upper atmosphere, joining the chaotic furball of ships locked in desperate combat above the krill homeworld. Dennis checked his weapons, knowing the fight was far from finished. But for the first time in this long, bitter war, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. They had a chance, slim, costly but real, to end this here and now. The dropship's hatch hissed open, releasing a cloud of acrid smoke. Dennis stumbled out, his armored boots clanging against the deck plating of Krasner's flagship. The hangar bay buzzed with frantic activity as medics rushed to attend the wounded and deck crews scrambled to prep fighters for the next sortie. Dennis's head spun, the adrenaline crash hitting him hard. He steadied himself against a nearby bulkhead, gulping in deep breaths of filtered air. His suit was a mess of scorch marks and impact dents, the paint job obliterated by the ferocity of the battle they'd just escaped. "Commander?" Sam's voice cut through the din. Dennis turned to see his friend limping towards him, supported by a Lethrai medic. "Thought we'd lost you back there." Dennis managed a weak smile. "Takes more than a krill walker to keep me down." He glanced around the hangar, taking stock of their battered forces. "How many made it out?" Sam's face fell. "Less than half. We took heavy losses in the final push to the extraction point." Before Dennis could respond, a holographic display flickered to life near the center of the hangar. Admiral Krasner's weathered face materialized, his eyes scanning the assembled troops. "Attention all personnel," Krasner's voice boomed. "We've dealt the krill a crippling blow, but our work is far from finished. All combat-ready units report to Briefing Room Alpha 3 in 10 minutes. We're pressing our advantage while we have it." The hologram winked out, leaving a tense silence in its wake. Dennis straightened up, ignoring the protests of his battered body. He turned to Sam and Praxar, who had just joined them. "You heard the Admiral. Let's get moving." They made their way through the ship's corridors, passing crewmen rushing to battle stations and repair teams working feverishly to patch hull breaches. The acrid smell of burnt circuitry hung in the air, a stark reminder of the beating the fleet had taken. As they entered the briefing room, Dennis was struck by how few familiar faces he saw. Rows of seats that should have been filled with squad leaders and platoon commanders now sat empty, a silent testament to the cost of their victory. Admiral Krasner stood at the front of the room, his holographic display showing a real-time map of the krill homeworld. As the last of the officers filed in, he began without preamble. "The destruction of the krill shipyards has opened a window of opportunity," Krasner said, his voice grave. "But it won't stay open for long. Our intel suggests the krill are already mobilizing their reserve fleets from the far side of the planet." The holographic display zoomed in on a sprawling cityscape, its alien architecture, a maze of twisting spires and biomechanical structures. "This is the capital city of the krill hierarchy," Krasner continued. "Our next target. If we can decapitate their leadership, we may be able to end this war in one fell swoop." Dennis leaned forward, studying the defenses surrounding the city. Even with their recent losses, the krill's home guard looked formidable. "What's the plan, sir?" he asked. Krasner's eyes met his, a hint of grim satisfaction in the old man's gaze. "We're going to give them a taste of their own medicine, Commander. Operation Nemesis begins in 6 hours. I suggest you all get some rest. You're going to need it." As the briefing concluded and the officers filed out, Dennis felt a mix of exhaustion and anticipation coursing through him. The end was in sight, but the bloodiest battle of the war still lay ahead. He silently vowed to see it through, at any expense. "Fast you!" The antimatter strike tore through the krill's outer defenses, leaving a gaping maw in the planet's surface. Dennis peered into the abyss, his helmet's sensors struggling to penetrate the swirling clouds of superheated plasma and debris. "Move out!" he barked, gesturing to his team. They rappelled down into the breach, mag boots clanking against exposed support struts as they descended into the bowels of the krill hive city. The acrid stench of ozone and burnt xenotech assaulted Dennis's nostrils even through his suit's filters. Ahead, the flickering glow of emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the twisted metal and shattered stone. A high-pitched whine cut through the air. "Incoming!" Sam shouted, swinging his turret cannon into position. The weapon's massive barrel tracked smoothly on its gyro mount, belching streams of superheated plasma. Krill hunter-killers poured from side tunnels, their cybernetic limbs scuttling across walls and ceilings. Disruptor beams lanced through the air, leaving ionized trails in their wake. A Marine to Dennis's left screamed as a molecular viral tech round found a gap in his armor, his body contorting grotesquely as the mutagenic payload rewrote his DNA. "Push forward," Dennis roared, his particle lance spitting coherent streams of energy. The weapon's capacitors whined as he swept it in a tight arc, cutting down 3 Krill warriors in rapid succession. Sam's turret cannon thundered, the continuous fire filling the tunnel with a hellish strobe effect. Xenoborg bodies piled up, their cyber-organic components twitching and sparking. But for every Krill they cut down, 2 more seemed to take its place. Dennis watched in horror as an entire squad of Marines was overwhelmed, disappearing under a tide of slashing talons and gnashing mandibles. "HFY commandos, establish a firing line," Dennis ordered, gesturing to their insectoid allies. The tall, chitinous warriors moved with fluid grace, their compound eyes glittering in the dim light. They formed up, plasma lances humming with barely contained energy. "Fire!" Praxar chittered, his mandibles clicking rapidly. A wave of concentrated plasma washed over the Krill positions, reducing hardened bunkers to molten slag. Dennis tapped his comm unit. "Krasner, we need those tanks down here now." As if in answer, the tunnel behind them rumbled. The first of the armored behemoths rolled into view, its massive treads crushing debris and Krill corpses alike. The tank's main guns swiveled, acquiring targets with inhuman precision. "Clear the lane," Dennis shouted, pulling his team to the sides of the tunnel. The tank's cannon spoke, a hypersonic round reducing an entire Krill fortification to atoms. They pushed deeper, Marines planting demo charges to clear collapsed sections. The battle became a blur of smoke, plasma fire, and screaming metal. Dennis lost track of time, his world narrowing to the next target, the next obstacle. Suddenly, reality itself seemed to twist. Dennis stumbled, his armor's inertial dampeners struggling to compensate. "Singular charges," he heard someone shout. "They're trying to cut us off." Dennis gritted his teeth, pushing through the warped space. His singularity shielding flared, fighting against the twisted geometry, threatening to tear him apart at a subatomic level. He emerged on the other side, gasping for breath. What he saw made his blood run cold. A Krill heavy walker company stood arrayed before them, their massive forms dwarfing even Krasner's tanks. Disruptor cannons glowed with building energy, promising annihilation. "Bomb squads, front and center," Dennis bellowed, his mind racing. It was suicide, but they had no choice. "On my mark, concentrated demo charge assault. Aim for the particle shields." Marines rushed forward, explosive payloads clutched in their arms. Dennis watched the timer on his HUD tick down, praying they'd make it in time. "Now," he roared. The air filled with arcing demolition charges, a deadly rain of high explosives. The Krill walkers opened fire, their disruptor blasts shredding entire squads caught in the open. But enough charges made it through. Explosions blossomed against the walkers' shields, overloading their defensive matrices. Dennis's particle lance joined a barrage of tank fire, punching through newly exposed weak points. One by one the titanic war machines toppled. Their reactor cores went critical, filling the cavern with blinding light and searing heat. When Dennis's vision cleared, he saw the path ahead open, but littered with the broken bodies of those who'd made it possible. There was no time to mourn. The sounds of battle echoed from every direction, as Krill counterattack squadrons swarmed from side tunnels. HFY air support screamed overhead, their bombing runs shaking the very foundations of the hive city. Dennis pushed on, his team at his heels. They had breached the outer defenses, but he knew the true test still lay ahead. Somewhere in the depths of this alien labyrinth, the Krill Supreme Command awaited, and with it, the fate of 2 civilizations hung in the balance. The ground beneath Dennis's feet trembled as the siege walkers advanced, their massive frames dwarfing the crumbling Krill defenses. Acrid smoke filled the air, stinging his eyes even through his helmet's filtration system. He felt the vibrations of the rail cannons in his chest, each thunderous blast sending shockwaves through the hive city's foundations. No sooner had the words left his mouth than a wave of Krill hunter-killers surged from hidden tunnels. Their biomechanical forms skittered across the debris-strewn floor, viral techs glowing with sickly green energy. A Marine to Dennis's left screamed as a disruptor beam caught him in the chest, his armor disintegrating in seconds. "Sam, suppress those bastards!" Dennis roared, diving behind a twisted piece of metal for cover. Sam's turret cannon swiveled, its barrel glowing white-hot as it unleashed a torrent of plasma. The air crackled with energy as the concentrated bursts tore through the Krill's armor, leaving smoldering holes in their wake. "Praxar, take your team and flank left," Dennis ordered, catching sight of the Lethrai commander's towering form. Praxar clicked his mandibles in acknowledgement, his compound eyes gleaming in the dim light. The Lethrai commandos moved with fluid grace, their chitinous exoskeletons reflecting the eerie glow of their plasma lances. Green fire erupted from their weapons, melting through Krill bunkers and leaving nothing but smoking husks in their wake. A deafening boom shook the cavern as a Krill heavy walker stomped into view, its molecular disruptors carving through the human barricades like paper. Dennis watched in horror as an entire squad of Marines was vaporized in an instant. Marines rushed forward, satchel charges and improvised explosives clutched in their arms. They hurled their payloads with practiced precision, the air filling with arcing demolition charges. The walkers' shields flared as the first wave hit, but under the relentless barrage, they quickly buckled. A blinding flash erupted as the walkers' power core went critical, the explosion consuming nearby Krill forces in a maelstrom of fire and shrapnel. Dennis shielded his eyes, feeling the heat even through his armor. "Push forward," he yelled, seizing the moment of chaos. "We're almost there." They fought their way through twisting corridors and vast chambers, each step bringing them closer to the heart of the Krill hive city. Dennis lost track of time, his world narrowing to the next target, the next obstacle to overcome. Suddenly they burst into an enormous cathedral-like space, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. Dennis's breath caught in his throat as he took in the sight before him. Rank upon rank of pulsating overcommand caskets lined the walls, their grotesque forms a fusion of organic matter and alien technology. Before he could issue new orders, a wave of psychic energy slammed into them. Dennis staggered, his vision blurring as the psionic assault tore at his mind. Around him, Marines fell to their knees, clutching their heads in agony. Through sheer force of will, Dennis fought against the mental onslaught. He saw legions of robotic purifiers advancing, their weaponry crackling with destructive potential. With trembling hands, he triggered the detonator for their heaviest demolition charges. The world turned white as quantum energies were unleashed, tearing apart the Krill's front lines. But even as the robotic juggernauts fell, the overcommand caskets pulsed with renewed fury, their psychic defenses intensifying. Dennis knew they were outmatched. Fighting through the pain, he activated his comlink. "Krasner," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of battle. "We've breached the Krill core, but their command matrices, psionic suppression grid, need immediate heavy ordnance support." The seconds stretched into eternity as Dennis waited for a response. Finally, Krasner's voice crackled through. "Copy that, son. All ships commence Sunfire protocol. Armored elements, clear the drop corridors on my mark." Dennis looked up, imagining Krasner's dreadnought high above, preparing to unleash its ultimate weapon. He saw the fear in the eyes of his fellow Marines, mixed with relentless drive. Whatever happened next would decide the fate of two civilizations. The air itself seemed to hold its breath as they waited for Krasner's strike. Dennis clenched his fists, every muscle in his body taut with anticipation. Then, with a sound that defied description, reality itself seemed to split open. The antimatter strike tore reality asunder, leaving a gaping wound in the Krill command citadel. Dennis stepped through the breach, his boots crunching on a carpet of twisted metal and alien viscera. The air reeked of ozone and burnt flesh, assaulting his nostrils even through his suit's filters. They moved cautiously through the devastation, Geiger counters ticking ominously. Shards of alien tech crunched underfoot, sparking fitfully in the gloom. Dennis's helmet-mounted lights swept across walls streaked with strange, iridescent fluids. "Sir," a Marine called out, "you need to see this." Dennis approached, his stomach churning at the sight. Massive bio-caskets lined the walls, their surfaces pulsing with residual energy. One had ruptured, spilling its contents onto the scorched floor. A viscous, quicksilver-like substance oozed from the breach, carrying fragments of alien circuitry. "Over-command matrices," Dennis breathed. He tapped his comm. "Recovery team, we've got a priority target. Bring the containment units." As his team worked to secure the alien tech, Dennis pushed deeper into the complex. The destruction grew more pronounced, evidence of the Krill's last stand etched in plasma burns and impact craters. A Marine stumbled, catching himself on a piece of debris. "Fuck," he hissed, yanking his hand back. The metal had sliced clean through his glove. Hours bled together as they combed the ruins. Dennis's muscles ached, fatigue settling into his bones. But they couldn't stop. Every scrap of intel was crucial. On the third day, as Dennis oversaw the upload of newly discovered data cores, his comm crackled to life. Krasner's voice, usually so composed, trembled slightly. "Dennis, you need to see this. The Krill, they're not what we thought." Dennis's blood ran cold as the information scrolled across his HUD. Engineered bioweapons, ancient precursors, galactic extinction events, each revelation more horrifying than the last. He stared at the ravaged alien cityscape, understanding dawning. This wasn't just an invasion, it was the echo of an apocalypse that had nearly consumed the universe itself. As night fell, Dennis stood atop a crumbling Krill battlement. In the distance, Krasner's fleets were already mobilizing. A new crusade was beginning, one that would take humanity to the very edges of known space. The enormity of what lay ahead threatened to overwhelm him. But as Dennis watched the first ship streak towards the stars, he knew there was no turning back. The fate of all life hung in the balance, and humanity would answer the call. The stars burned cold and distant as Dennis stood on the observation deck of Krasner's flagship. His bones ached with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. The revelation of the Krill's true nature and the scale of the threat they represented caused great concern on him. "We need to go deeper," Krasner's voice cut through Dennis's thoughts. The Admiral's face was etched with lines of fatigue, but his eyes burned with fierce willpower. "Kilometers," Krasner replied, bringing up a holographic display of the Krill homeworld. A network of tunnels and chambers sprawled beneath the surface like a cancerous growth. "Our orbital scans can't penetrate that deep. We need boots on the ground." Within hours, Dennis found himself aboard a heavily armored dropship, plunging into the atmosphere of the ravaged planet. The turbulence shook the craft violently, threatening to tear it apart. Dennis gripped the harness, his teeth clenched as they descended into darkness. The team he'd assembled was a motley crew. Grizzled human Marines with 1,000-yard stares sat shoulder to shoulder with towering Lethrai commandos, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming in the dim light. Most unsettling were the reprogrammed Krill hunter-killer cyborgs, their alien forms a stark reminder of the enemy they faced. The strike force moved with practiced precision, sweeping through debris-strewn corridors and shattered chambers. The silence was broken only by the crunch of boots on pulverized alien tech and the occasional hiss of escaping gases from ruptured conduits. Suddenly a cacophony of screeches filled the air. Dennis's HUD lit up with movement signatures. "Contact cyberswarms at 2 o'clock. A tide of metallic insects poured from hidden vents, their razor-sharp mandibles clicking with murderous intent. Dennis's particle lance flared to life, carving swaths through the swarm. Around him, his team opened fire, filling the air with a storm of plasma bolts and disruptor beams. For hours they fought their way deeper into the complex, battling waves of robotic sentries and automated defense systems. Dennis lost count of the close calls, his armor scorched and dented from near misses. Finally, they breached the outer defenses of the archival vault. As the massive doors ground open, Dennis's breath caught in his throat. Before them stretched an endless sea of alien data matrices, their conduits pulsing with an eerie blue glow. "By the stars," a Marine whispered, his voice filled with awe and dread. Dennis shook off his momentary paralysis. "Tech team, start the upload. The rest of you establish a defensive perimeter. This isn't over yet." As the technicians worked feverishly to connect their equipment to the alien interfaces, Dennis's comm crackled to life. Krasner's voice, tight with urgency, filled his helmet. "Dennis, we're detecting energy spikes throughout the system. Whatever's in those databanks, it's setting off a chain reaction. You need to move fast." Dennis gritted his teeth, watching the progress bar of the data transfer crawl agonizingly slow. "Copy that, Admiral. We're not leaving without those files." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Dennis paced restlessly, his eyes darting between the upload status and the vault entrance, half expecting another wave of Krill defenses to pour through at any moment. Finally, the lead technician gave a triumphant shout, "Upload complete, we've got it all." As they raced back to the dropship, Dennis's mind reeled from the implications of what they'd discovered. The Krill were just the beginning, a fraction of the nightmares unleashed by the long-dead precursors. And somewhere out in the vast emptiness between galaxies, something far worse was stirring. The Hyperion's command deck fell silent as the last echoes of Krasner's words faded. Dennis stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the swirling vortex of impossibility displayed on the main view screen. The cosmic horror approaching their galaxy defied comprehension, its very existence an affront to the laws of physics. Krasner tapped a series of commands into his console. The display shifted, showing a time-lapse projection of the entity's approach. "At current velocities, we have approximately 18 months before it reaches the outer fringes of the Milky Way." Dennis nodded, his mind racing. "And our options?" A junior officer spoke up, her voice trembling. "Sir, we've run every scenario through the tactical computers. Conventional weapons, even our most powerful antimatter warheads, would be like throwing pebbles at a supernova." The air grew thick with tension as the implications sank in. Dennis watched as hope drained from the faces around him, replaced by a grim acceptance of their seemingly inevitable fate. Suddenly, a crackling voice cut through the silence. "Permission to speak, Admiral?" It was Dr. Elara Chen, the reclusive xenophysicist who had been instrumental in decoding the Kriel's technology. Chen's holographic avatar flickered to life in the center of the command deck. "What if we're looking at this all wrong? We're treating this entity as if it's bound by our understanding of physics, but it clearly operates on principles far beyond our current science." Dennis leaned forward, intrigued. "Go on, Doctor." Chen's fingers danced across an unseen interface, pulling up complex equations and multidimensional models. "The data we've gathered suggests this being exists partially outside our dimensional framework. It's not just big, it's folded in on itself in ways that shouldn't be possible." The holographic display twisted and warped, attempting to represent concepts that human minds struggled to grasp. Several officers turned away, their eyes unable to process the visual paradoxes. "If we can't fight it conventionally," Chen continued, her voice gaining strength, "maybe we can disrupt its very structure, use its own impossible geometry against it." Krasner's eyes narrowed. "And how do you propose we do that, Doctor?" The scientist's hologram expanded, filling the room with schematics and theoretical models. "Everything, every scrap of alien tech we've recovered, every brilliant mind we can muster, and most importantly, time." Dennis turned to Krasner, a fire rekindling in his eyes. "Admiral, I volunteer to lead this project. We'll need to coordinate with every allied species, pool our resources like never before." Krasner nodded slowly, the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. "Do it. You have full authority to requisition whatever you need. But Dennis," he added, his voice low, "if this fails—" "I know," Dennis replied, his fists tight. "We'll have brought that horror right to our doorstep with nothing left to stop it." As the briefing dissolved into a flurry of activity, Dennis found himself staring once more at the view screen. The cosmic leviathan loomed there, a promise of oblivion made manifest. He clenched his fists, pushing down the primal fear that threatened to overwhelm him. In 18 months, they would either save existence itself or usher in its final end. The countdown to humanity's greatest test had begun. If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.